Now to Ukraine, where authorities say they've arrested 4 people after security services foiled plans for what they say is a Russian-backed coup attempt. The domestic intelligence agency says a group of conspirators had plotted to start a riot, storm the Parliament building and then replace the leadership on Sunday during Constitutional Day celebrations. Kyiv claims it's been the target of several coup plots over the last few years. Well, our correspondent Nick Connolly in Kyiv told me more about what the security services have been saying.
This is basically still just their claim. We've seen some pictures, we had a press release, we've seen blurred pictures of these men, some of whom look to be in middle or late middle age, don't look particularly martial, don't look particularly fit or threatening in a kind of obvious way. We've seen some images of pistols and rifles, and as you mentioned there, the claim is that they were planning protests in Kyiv that would oppose the leadership, the government here, the implication being claim that they are illegitimate and then try and lead those people that would have turned up to that demonstration, not all of whom would have been in on the plot, that is the line, to the Parliament to try and stop Parliament functioning and then to use that as a kind of trampoline to take over power. Quite how convincing, quite how big their chances were, we can't tell. It sounds like from the press release that the intelligence agencies here were on their case pretty early on and were watching and reading everything they were doing. But this is obviously in normal times a crazy story, but in wartime in Ukraine, on a day like today here in Kyiv, where you've had 4 air raid alerts and the real threat of ballistic missiles being used, it is just another story, another day here in Kyiv, and something that seems par for the course for most people.
There was a lot of talk at the start of this war about plots to kill President Zelensky. How frequent are these kinds of threats to Ukraine's government?
So we tried to look into how many attempts to kill Zelensky there had been, and we couldn't find any particularly convincing numbers. One thing certainly that you find over and over again is a quote from one of Zelensky's closest advisors, Podolyak, who said that within the first month of the war there were around 10 attempts on Zelensky's life. We can't say quite how serious some of them were, but certainly just as recently as May of this year, there was a very serious, seemingly, plot within his security detail. 2 colonels, very high-ranking officials in the kind of state security service, were arrested and are still in detention for allegedly working with the Russians to kill Zelensky, others seemingly more amateur. But even if these attempts don't have any chance of success, this is all part of the bigger picture. Russia is making progress on the front lines, but it is very slow and costing Russia huge numbers of lives. And I think they still think that with a bit of money, a bit of subterfuge and recruiting people through social media and through old contacts, they can create protests here on the streets of Kyiv, they can create chaos, they can knock the government off course, and they can achieve, comparatively a lot with relatively small resources. So these attempts are seemingly never-ending. They come from different sides. On the smaller side, you have people, informing the Russians about Ukrainian rather military movements. You have talk of people trying to discredit the government, doing strange things that are then reported and shared on Russian social media. But this is certainly a situation that Ukraine and its politics has to live with it.
And a brief word about the sorts of precautions that are in place to protect the president and the government.
Well, certainly there is very tight security whenever Volodymyr Zelensky turns up. His appearances are not trailed in advance. He turns up and you hear about it after he's left. But it isn't like Kyiv is a city that is permanently on lockdown. This is still a city where civilians move around pretty freely and where there is light touch security. Most of the time, those security officers are in plain clothes and are not out on the streets with guns. So certainly, for now, it is working, and it is working in a way without major inconvenience to the millions of people living here in Kyiv.
Nick Connolly in Kyiv, thank you so much.